This evening, the theme for the talk, in discussing with Irene and others here, we decided on Buddhism and mindfulness in the West, and what are the prospects and what are the challenges that accompany these. What can we look forward to, or what direction are they heading in? So we'll explore this theme a little bit, offer a few reflections, perspectives on this from my own point of view, and then we'll have a time to have discussion, open things up, and to hear your own views, your own perspectives, and to ask any questions that you might like. So when we consider, say, mindfulness, Buddhism and mindfulness, where are they headed? The first response that comes to my mind is, good question. Because, of course, the future is unknown, is uncertain, but we can possibly see various trends and threads that are say, taking shape already, and projections that we can make into the future. One small caveat that I would make is that sometimes things that seem to be very obvious trends and a powerful direction, sometimes they can collapse, and then things that seem to be small or tangential or insignificant can turn out to be the defining or the dominant quality. You know, there's a few examples. Say Theravada Buddhism, as we know it today, was just one of many groups. I'm sure there's a few Buddhist historians in the room who can challenge my modest knowledge of Buddhist history. But because of the school that spread to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, or Tambapani as it was in those days, that within that island culture, a particular strand of Buddha Dhamma was sustained, and then has sort of informed what we now call Theravada Buddhism, which is the Buddhism of the southern Asian world all these centuries later. But at the time, it was just one of many different schools, so that it was not particularly dominant, as I understand it. Or even going further back into history, at the end of the era of the dinosaurs, the mammals are our physical ancestors, small rodent-type creatures. They were the ones that survived the effects of a meteorite striking the Earth, and that made it through after the era of the dinosaurs came to an end. They made it through. They found ways to adapt and survive, and then here we are. These are our ancestors. Strange as though it might be to consider that. So that's a caveat in terms of the themes or threads that we see today might not be the defining qualities into the future, but the best that we can do is to look at the world, to look at the picture as we see it now, and to say extrapolate a little bit, and also to use that extrapolation, that way, that say forecasting, to help us make skillful decisions and to guide things in a helpful way here in the present. So in considering this whole field, and also having lived most of my life as a Buddhist monastic in the West, since the end of 1979, so nearly 40 years living in the West, this question of bringing the Buddhist teachings and how they can function usefully in the Western world has been very much the center of my whole adult life. So I've been close to this question for many years. Also being a kind of card-carrying, flag-wearing traditionalist, I've been very much part of an orthodox order, and say a group of people taking a method of practice and a way of life that is very strongly informed by classical models, classical forms. But along the way, I've also been collaborating with and connecting with and offering teachings to people who have not been using the classical forms in such a way, not robe-wearing or not living according to the Vinaya discipline. And so that there's over these years, there's been a constant dialogue between the forces of, say, traditionalism, or the reference to the classical forms, and the endeavor to be authentic and to be sincerely representing those classical models, and the endeavor to be authentic in respect to the origins of the tradition and the Buddhist teachings, but also to be in a constant mode of adaptation. The Buddha Dhamma is a living teaching, a living tradition, and it adapts to and needs to be able to work within the environments in which it is established and being practiced. So there's a dialogue that's been going on for many decades now between adaptation and authenticity. This is a simple way of phrasing it. And so that over the years, many Buddhist conferences and dialogues and interactions, leading events together. Sometimes there'd be a lay teacher in a monastic, or sitting in on conferences where, like just in July of this year, I was at a conference on mindfulness in Amsterdam. 600 delegates to the conference, one person in robes. Wow. So, okay, this is not completely my territory, but also being able to say, be in an environment like that and not feel completely like a fish out of water, but still having a sense of belonging and affiliation and affinity with people there. Also, I was invited to give a talk about stream entry, which is one of the reasons why I attended the conference. And I thought, well, if you have 600 academic psychologists and therapists and researchers who want to hear about stream entry, that's an interesting sign of the times. So when I speak about authenticity, that's not just referring to being, representing classical forms or ancient traditions, like the robes, the shaven head, the adherence to the Vinaya discipline. But I feel it's also important to, if we're talking about authenticity, to see that if we need to be authentic, if we want to say follow the Buddha's teaching, in terms of his pragmatism. The Buddha was bringing a teaching into the world that was a revolutionary teaching in many respects, and that transformative quality of the teaching. It wasn't just a belief system, it wasn't just another set of customs or forms or rituals, but rather it was a set of tools that he brought into the Indian society of the subcontinent in that era, in order to help people to transform their lives. That's what it was for. So part of authenticity is not being sort of an authentic monk, or just by following the forms, reciting Pali suttas, and carrying out the traditions and rituals of the ancient times. But I feel authenticity is also, strongly connected with how useful are you? How much can your life, your teachings, what you do, how you are, how can that be of practical benefit to the people that you encounter? When people are meeting you, they're drawing upon your tradition or your teachings, that to what degree can that benefit their lives? So that being authentic in terms of the practical results of these teachings. So I feel when we talk about that dimension of things, it's important to recognize there's authenticity in relationship to form and classical structures, but also authenticity in terms of the spirit and the intention behind the Buddha teaching and making the effort that he did to establish the monastic orders, the fourfold assembly of lay disciples, lay women, lay men, and the monastic communities of nuns and monks. That he spent all those years, 45 years of his teaching career, bringing that all together and establishing that in a way that could sustain itself over long periods of time. So then, if we look at the way things have been progressing, I personally, obviously my perspective is biased, but I see that for Buddhism and mindfulness, as I would say, I would be presumptuous enough to say that's an offshoot of Buddhism. That there are other mindfulness trainings that have come out of different traditions to certain degrees. I wouldn't say Buddhism has the monopoly on mindfulness, but that's its presence in the world, particularly in the West, in this current age, has very directly sprung from particularly John Kabat-Zinn's experience and practice, his life, his work, which is very directly informed by Buddhist practice. In fact, at a conference here in San Francisco in 2013, he said, quote unquote, "I've always used the word mindfulness as a placeholder for Dharma," quote unquote. So that So that quality of Buddhism and mindfulness, I feel there's a lot of very powerful benefits that this has brought and is bringing, and I can see continuing to bring many, many benefits into society. Nowadays, there's what you might even refer to as an epidemic of mental health problems, a lot of, particularly depression and anxiety. According to the statistics that I've been shown, there are double the number of work days lost per year around the globe from depression than any other kind of injury or illness. So it's not just a personal issue, it's an economic issue as well. So more than double the number of work days lost around the world from heart disease, hand injury, eye injury, back injury. Depression is the cause of more work days lost and is a huge social issue. In the UK this year, just a month or so ago, I saw an extremely shocking statistic. Again, this is, I don't know how well substantiated it is, but it was said in a reputable newspaper that 40% of girls in England between the ages of 13 and 16 had received some kind of psychiatric help or advice, had sought psychiatric treatment of some kind. 40%. That's a staggering number to me. And so that's saying that 4 out of every 10 teenage girls of that age in the UK have needed to go to some kind of counsellor or therapist or psychiatrist or school medical assistance that says, I need help. My mind is in such a state, I need support, I need help, I can't handle my mind, my life is too painful, too difficult, I need help. So just as one example. So I feel that mindfulness and Buddhism, Buddhist meditation in particular in the Western world, is doing a wonderful job, is doing great service in providing resources that can meet those kind of difficulties. Obviously this is blowing our own trumpet a little bit, but when the work to develop mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression was developed by John Teasdale, Mark Williams, Zindel Siegel in the 2000s, I think they were about 10 years ago or so. I think it was 2007 or so, where there's a major paper was published on this, when they first produced results that showed that this method of working with the mind, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is directly informed by Buddhist meditation practices, that whereas if someone had a repeated instance of depression, prior to 2007, when they began to use this, I'm not 100% accurate about the dates, but around then, the most successful methods for treating recurrent depression had a 5 to 10% recovery rate. So if you had more than one episode of depression, you were 90 to 95% likely to have it come back again. Whether you had therapy, whether you had psychoanalysis, whether you had shock treatment, whether you had medication, and no treatment had a better than 10% recovery rate. When they began to use mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, they had a 50% recovery rate. According to the narrative I heard about this, when they first published this study, the rest of the academic community said, rubbish. You've botched your results, this can't be right. You can't be 500% better than anybody else. This is fallacious, you've fudged your statistics, you must have made a big mistake, or you're just wrong. So they did that initial study in the UK, they repeated it in the USA, they got the same results. That's when interest in mindfulness started to kind of go into the hockey stick. It started to escalate because this was a massively impactful, approach. So obviously it's not going to solve all the world's problems, but I feel this is one indication of how mindfulness and Buddhist meditation can have an extremely meaningful and direct impact on society, and I feel very positive about that. The acceptance, another of the positives that in terms of direction, is that a number of government bodies, like there was a book published here in the US, Mindful Nation, by a US senator, which is kind of surprising. But a US senator published that, and then there was a follow-up with a similar title in the UK, Mindful Nation UK, which is a publication that was supported by the United Kingdom government, and this was describing programs and the effect of programs in the academic field, in education, in mental health, physical health, criminal justice, and the business world, and of introducing mindfulness trainings in these different domains and how they had brought particular benefits. And to my amazement, they said that 20% of members of parliament had signed up and put their names on this, which is a huge amount of support in my mind. And that number of members of parliament, the leaders of the government, would stick their name and say, yes, this is something I support, this is a good thing. They're not saying I'm a Buddhist or becoming a robe-wearing, shaven-headed traditionalist, but I feel that's a wonderful sign that a government can, in a bipartisan way, can pick up these trainings, these methods, and say, this is something that the nation will be benefited by, and we're happy to put our names on it and support it to be developed. So I feel that's a very positive sign. I feel also that in terms of positive aspects of mindfulness and Buddhism, this is the sweet spot. We're in the Goldilocks, if that's not politically incorrect nowadays, I'm not sure. But the Goldilocks period for Buddhism in the West, and because you are probably unlikely to get a lot of votes by calling yourself Buddhist. It's not like if you're born into a Buddhist family, that'll get you an in at Stanford, or maybe it will. But it's not. It doesn't carry a huge social cachet. It's not particularly. It doesn't carry any weight. We're outliers. We're kind of fringe dwellers. It's not an established religion in the West in any particularly strong way. So where it's present, but we are basically politically powerless. So this is great. I feel that it's where the teachings are available, the practices are available. There are good teachers around. There are good amenities, facilities, like here in the Bay Area. You have thick on the ground from not just the Theravada tradition, like the Insight Meditation Center, Gil Fronsdal's place, or Spirit Rock, but also Zen tradition. You have Zen Center, Tassajara and Green Gulch. You have Tibetan centers, many different traditions. So that these are places that have a practical benefit, and there's not a kind of major social, weight that they carry, if you understand what I mean. So that the teachings are here, they're present, they're practiced in sincere ways. Most of us as Westerners were not born into Buddhist families. Most of us have come into Buddhist meditation and Buddhist practice of mindfulness out of a pragmatic need, a pragmatic interest. So we're not doing it out of inheriting a tradition or a form from our ancestors, our parents. We're doing it because it helps. We're interested, we're putting energy and effort into it because it helps. In 100 years' time, I would predict, then there are going to be Buddhist families, and it is going to carry a weight. You are going to be able to sort of present yourself as a Buddhist, and that's going to get you elected, because it's a big point to sort of put on your resume. Like, having a PhD from Stanford, it's like, oh, really? Then that gets someone's attention. Or you come from a Kennedy family, or you're a Bush. The name carries some weight. Or you got a DPhil from Oxford University. Oh, really? And so in 100 years' time, I suspect that Buddhism will have put its roots down and it'll carry that kind of social weight. But it doesn't at the moment. And personally, I feel that's a really good thing, to be an outsider, to be a freak. I was always quite comfortable looking a bit strange. But I feel this, rather than feeling that necessitates shaving your head and wearing a robe, I feel it's a really an advantage to be an outlier, to be able to use these practices, these traditions, in a very uncluttered way, and to relate to them not because it's got an inherited value system, but because the qualities that the meditation and the practices, the teachings possess are of direct benefit, and you can test that out and know that for yourselves. It's not just got an inherited or an assumed value, but its value is coming from one's own experience. So I think, make hay while the sun shines. be glad that you've been born in this particular period. You might, of course, be born again in the future period. But I won't go into that. But I would say this is a precious time, a really good opportunity where these amenities, these teachings, these practices are available, and they're not cluttered up by having a great social weight. Having been trained in Asia, say in Thailand, where Buddhism has been established for about 800 years in a solid way, other Buddhist countries where it is an ancient tradition, they carry a lot of weight. When I walk around dressed like this, I don't have any other clothes. These are my clothes. I don't have jeans. I always walk around dressed like this. If you're in the West, you're a bit of a freak. People kind of come up to you and say, well, what are you? Nowadays they'd say, oh, are you from Thailand? But you're a bit of a freak, you're a bit of a strange thing. You can stand on the tube and just the underground train, on the BART, and people just sort of squash up against you and not think twice about it. If you're in Thailand, if you get onto the train there, then people will be on the ground, hands in Anjali, kneeling and say, oh, please, have a seat. How can I get out of the way? Can I bring you a cold drink? You're a rock star. As a monk, you're a deity, and there's a huge amount of assumed value just in wearing a robe and being a monastic. And it can be enjoyable, but it also, there's an automatic assumed worth just by carrying the credentials, by wearing the robe. And that, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I feel it's helpful to be in a time where that it doesn't have that weight of custom and tradition and ancestry behind it, but its appearance is very fresh and alive. Another of the positive aspects is that the approach of the Buddha is a very experimental approach, rather than him saying, I'm telling you the absolute truth and you should believe it. One of the most significant teachings that caught the attention of the European intelligentsia back in the 19th century and even earlier was that the Buddha said, don't believe things just because they're told to you by spiritual authorities. Don't believe things just because they make logical sense or because your family follow these customs and have these beliefs. But take a teaching, try it out, see if it's beneficial for yourself. So that fits in very much with the scientific ethic. You have a null hypothesis, you kind of create an idea, you try it out, you see whether it works or not, what's the result of that. So the fact that the Buddhist approach, right from the very beginning, and its very ethos, fits in with that Western scientific method, I feel is another way that makes it very accessible. So therefore, say for example, at Amaravati Monastery, we have a very, very broad and eclectic group of people who come to regular retreats and classes. So it's not certainly not just Asian people, but certainly many, many Westerners and Middle Easterners. Whether people happen to come from a Buddhist background, or Christian background, or atheist background, or Muslim background, or Hindu background. We have people from all different religious, ancestries and dispositions coming to meditation classes. And the way that we teach classes is that, and this was Ajahn Sumedho's insistence right from the beginning, he said, don't assume that the people who come through the door want to be Buddhist. But they want to have an instruction in how to make their mind more peaceful, how to understand their life, how to live more skillfully. So don't teach in a way that assumes people want to be a Buddhist, or that they're fed up with being a Muslim or a Christian, or that they're going to be benefited by shedding their old religion and becoming Buddhist. No, it's important to speak in a way that completely respects people's own preferences in terms of religious disposition, spiritual inclination, or lack of it. And so that's one of the great strengths, I feel, of Buddhism and the mindfulness teachings, is that they can be put across completely faithfully to their sources, faithful to the Buddha's word, without saying, if you were wise, you would think like me. If you want to really straighten out your life, be a Buddhist like me. But rather, here are some tools that you can use, whether you're a practicing Christian or a Hindu or a Muslim or you're a skeptical materialist. Fine, these tools work just the same. Like water comes out of the tap and it's water, whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu or you're you're from Alpha Centauri, wherever you're from, it's still water. So that the Buddha's teachings function in a very practical and accessible way. So in terms of the challenges and obstacles, of course they are many and various. And so in terms of mindfulness and Buddhism, one of the ongoing issues and discussions is commercialism, the marketing of the Dhamma. And I've been in many conversations and discussions with different groups and different individuals over the years. And again, I feel we are somewhat in the sweet spot. So even if people who try to market Buddhism, it's not that marketable. It's not a kind of a hugely sort of compelling consumer item. But still, it is drifting in that direction. And so sometimes you'll see meditation courses or seminars or mindfulness programs that do make kind of outrageous promises. Just do this course, pay $5,000 for this weekend, and your life will be changed forever, and you'll be happy and liberated, enlightened, and so on. I mean, these are sweeping statements, and I'm not quoting adverts verbatim, but I think we probably all come across those kind of pieces of literature and promises. So I do feel that's an uncomfortable drift, and also the commercializing of Dharma, that when things have a big price tag on them, then they have to be dressed up in a way that makes them interesting, sexy, attractive, and so that sometimes the challenging aspects of the teaching, the teachings that say point to your opinions, your sort of middle class materialist value systems, that the teachings that challenge that, or your attachment to your appearance, your wealth, then that can be something that is trimmed out because it doesn't help the seats to get filled at your events. So that I feel is an ongoing dialogue, but I feel it's a weakness, the degree to which the challenging teachings, or the teachings that are not quite so attractive or appealing, kind of get edited out or left in the fringes, and so that it can weaken the teaching. Many years ago, when Ajahn Chah, our teacher from Thailand, was visiting the one time he visited the USA in 1979, he was invited to teach during a 10-day retreat at Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. And he was asked to give advice to the teachers there, Jack Cornfield, Sharon Salzberg, Jackie Schwartz, Jackie Mandel, I think she goes by now, Sharon Salzberg, and Joseph Goldstein. And they asked Ajahn Chah to give them advice as teachers. And one of the comments that he made, he said, you will succeed only if you are prepared to challenge the attachments and obsessions of your students. The Thai phrase is literally, if you're ready to stab their hearts. So he had a good way of getting people's attention. So if you don't do that, because that's the kindness of the teacher, is in being ready to point out things that the students are deeply attached to, and particularly the things they really don't want to let go of. That's the job of the teacher. That's the kindness of the teacher. So, like, probably there's a few doctors here, a few surgeons. How could a surgeon operate if you didn't use a knife occasionally? I mean, there's a lot of microsurgery now, but you need the knife sometimes to get to where the trouble is. And so that was pointed, pun intended, advice from Ajahn Chah that the kindness of the teacher sometimes needs to manifest itself in giving advice that is painful or challenging, and goes against the preferred version of reality of the student. Another story that comes to mind is a friend of ours, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Lama. He would refer to this kind of editing the way of approach to Dharma practice according to your own preferences. With present company accepted, he called this California Dharma. How, like, yes, I see, all things are empty, nothing is worth attaching to, but I just like my comforts, it's just, I'd like to have a few beautiful things around. I'm not attached, but, I just like to have a beautiful home and a nice view, kind of picture window in Marin County over the bay, and, I'm not attached. I'm not attached. So he was in this particularly beautiful house in Marin, and his host was a very, very wealthy family, and was talking in these terms. And so then Rinpoche picked up this coffee pot that was sitting on the table, and he kind of started tilting it, and he said, "How much did this carpet cost you?" It was like a handmade Turkish carpet. And the guy said, "About $35,000. He said, "So tell me about your non-attachment." And he's kind of tilting the coffee pot a little bit more, a little bit more. He said, "So, you say you really like this place and you enjoy having beautiful things around, but you're really not attached. So how not attached are you?" And he kind of tilting another 2 degrees, another 3 degrees. All right. I'm attached. Don't spoil the carpet, So I thought it was a very practical teaching. That's also the kind of teaching that you get from the Thai forest ajahns as well. Very to the point. So that kind of trimming and editing of the Dhamma teachings to fit people's preferences and opinions, and that it's not challenging, I feel that's a weakness that is happening in the West. And particularly, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, with respect to mindfulness teachings and the absence of teachings on ethics, the deliberate leaving out of teachings on sila, on ethics, say the 5 ethical precepts that the Buddha established as guidance for the lay community. That's very deliberately left out of the mindfulness trainings, mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And I've had long discussions, correspondence with John Kabat-Zinn, friendly, and also not so much with Mark Williams, but who is also had been one of the founders of MBCT, and they both speak very strongly in terms of the need to leave ethics as implicit rather than explicit in terms of those trainings. So I brought along a little piece I'd like to read out in relationship to that. But I feel that's something that is a rich and ongoing discussion within that field about whether ethics should be articulated or not. But personally, my own probably biased opinion is that it's a weakness, and it will be much more helpful to be more explicit, spelling things out in terms of what really benefits us as human beings. And I would say that ethical guidelines, the precepts, can be articulated and held without it being sort of religious diktats or sort of Victorian sort of uptight formalism, but rather as skillful guidelines for living carefully. The other shortcomings or challenges, I feel, is the ongoing meshing of ancient traditions and sort of patriarchal Asian societal forms into an egalitarian Western society. So that's an interesting mix. We have to bear in mind that the Buddha was teaching 2,500 years ago. That was the Iron Age. I mean, I realize that this is a kind of a European way of speaking, because West Coast America, they didn't. The native peoples didn't even forge iron, to my knowledge. In this part of the world, it was a stone culture, and stone and wickerwork and such like. But even in Europe, that was the Iron Age when the Buddha was teaching. It was a long time ago, and so the forms that you have in traditional Buddhist societies, say in Thailand, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in China, in Japan, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Nepal, and into Mongolia and Siberia and so forth. The forms which have been the body of Buddhist practice and the presence of the Buddhist community and society, they have been formed over many, many centuries. And so taking that and planting that into Western society, there's a lot of challenges in that, and that in terms of adaptation and what to keep, what not to keep, how to adapt things, how to change things. And so that's an ongoing dialogue. And I say, in some respects, it's a weakness or it's a challenge, because some things don't fit very well in terms of the kind of customs and traditions, the superstitions and forms, and so that they don't work very well. They're an uncomfortable fit in Western society. Other things do fit well, but they're just really unfamiliar. They're really unfamiliar and strange to our perceptions. So that's, for myself, in my own community, that's been a very rich and ongoing dialogue. It's quite notable that when Ajahn Chah first came to teach, and he told, he received an invitation from a group in London to go and visit their little monastery in Hampstead, on Haverstock Hill in London. And when he agreed to accept the invitation and told Ajahn Sumedho and a few other monks they should stay there, he said, you can change the robes if you want to, you can change the chanting, you can adapt those. This is a cold country, you can adapt those if you want to, if you need to, but you have to go out on alms round every single day. And so they thought, well, that's kind of strange. I thought he'd be really insistent on the robes and on the ritual forms, but why go on alms round? Who's going to put food in our bowls in London? But he was really strong on that. Said, no, you have to go out. Your job is to be the fourth heavenly messenger, the sign of renunciation. So you have to go out every day. So that became a very strong ethic for us. I mean, again, we have adapted that a little bit over time. But that's an ongoing, question, and something that we're working with, particularly with women in monasticism in Asia. The nuns' position, particularly in Thailand, is it's a very, very lowly position socially, and the monks' position is very, very high. And so, what we in the Buddhist world, it's probably the most stratified of any Buddhist country. So that, having come from our roots in Thailand, then that's a really big challenge to then have a form whereby the women monastics have a comparable status and comparable sort of authority and responsibility within the community. So Ajahn Sumedho made some very sort of courageous changes and adaptations back in the early 80s, and so that is sort of informed the particular form that we have for women's monastic training within our community. And so that's a very area of very rich discussion and ongoing dialogue between us and various different groups around the world. But that was probably the most a kind of gnarly, to use a California term, a kind of gnarly area of working together, because back in that time, in the early 80s, we'd moved out of London. We'd been invited to move to the countryside. We'd been given a forest, and they'd sold a house in London, and a house in the country near the forest was purchased for us. And so then Ajahn Sumedho first started carrying out ordinations. He was given permission by the Thai Sangha to be a preceptor, and so he carried out the first monk ordinations. And there were already some novice nuns, novice monks ordinations that he'd done. So then, so the first ordinations for monks were in 1981, and everyone thought, oh, sadhu, sadhu, this is all very good, this is great. And then 82 goes by, 83 goes by. So each year there's a few more men going into the bhikkhu life. Meanwhile, the women have been coming. They've been taking on the Thai 8-precept form for women's training. And very naturally, people who are supporting the monastery were coming and saying, well, this is great that all these men are going forth and taking on the monk's life. Is Sister Rojana, Sister Sundra, Chandasiri, are they going to be in the kitchen forever? So, to his great credit, Ajahn Sumedho said, good question. That can't be sustained. That's not fair. That's not right. That's never going to work in the West, and we have to do something about that. So he's a very reflective person, started thinking about it and discussing with elders in Thailand, and so then he, over time, he got permission to create a 10-precept ordination for the nuns to say, establish what we call the Siladhara ordination, so that gave the nuns brown robes. They have 10 precepts, they don't use money, they don't cook, they don't drive. And so it was establishing a renunciate form for women's monastic training that was, say, acceptable by the Thai authorities and our Thai community, but also fitted in with society in the West to a degree. And it's kind of equally awkward on both sides, so that it's kind of a bit too much for Thailand and not quite enough for the West. But we live in two worlds, so that for the Westerners, like, should be better, and then for the Thais, should be better. So that probably tells us we've got it about right. Obviously, things will change and they continue to adapt over time. But I do a lot of what I call mindfulness of awkward feeling as a practice. That this isn't a perfect fit, but we have got a 2,500-year-old tradition, and even in Thailand it's 800 years old. So meshing at least an 800-year-old system with a 21st century life, there's bound to be a bit of awkwardness. And so I feel working in that spirit and doing the best that one can, and having the practical nature of the training and living, say, opportunities as the primary concern, that's the most important thing. So to speak a little bit about a couple of other aspects then with respect to going back to mindfulness, I thought I'd read this little piece. So I was invited to write a commentary on an article in the academic journal Mindfulness. So I'll read a few things out from this, and excuse me if this seems a bit tangential, but I thought it would be useful to be aware, for those of you who are not so connected with mindfulness-based stress reduction and this sort of field, and this addresses some of these aspects about the relationship between MBSR and the ethical field, and also some of my comments about that, because I was invited to. The original article was written by Elaine Montero, who's from the University of Toronto, and her partners, and then they published my commentary in the Mindfulness Journal. So this comes from the article that I wrote. So John Kabat-Zinn in 2004 defined mindfulness as: mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Then this is my comment is: this definition is somewhat broad and, though useful, is open to misinterpretation or misuse. On this issue, Montero et al. Commented firstly on the implicit rather than the explicit role of ethics in the teaching and practice of mindfulness. So Montero says that this omission of sila may result in concepts such as non-judgmental awareness, fostering a range of negative stances from self-indulgence to passivity. And this is where, in the absence of proper teacher training, a poor grasp of concepts such as bare awareness, non-judgmental awareness, non-duality, and so on, are likely to misguide participants into bypassing their experience rather than connecting with it. Then, as a different section, it says, the response to this central issue concerning mindfulness-based interventions, MBIs, from the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction is significant. Montero, again Elaine Montero, stated, reflecting on the choice to keep the teachings of ethics implicit, John Kabat-Zinn states that each person carries the responsibility, both personally and professionally, to attend to the quality of their inner and outer relationships. At the same time, he indicates that this must be supported, quote, by explicit intentions regarding how we conduct ourselves both inwardly and outwardly. Further, Kabat-Zinn, in 2011, responds to earlier concerns about the exclusion of ethics by indicating that personal and professional ethical guidelines are intrinsic to the delivery of MBI, mindfulness-based intervention programs. He also argues that because there is a societal tendency to be incongruent with respect to inner and outer moral stances, an implicit teaching of sila is preferable. Okay, now I'll go into that a little bit, because you might have thought, huh, at that point. So, my comments are, John Kabat-Zinn's words here seem particularly carefully chosen. they're balanced on a tightrope between his acknowledged respect for the source of MBSR, quote, "I've always used mindfulness as a placeholder for the Dhamma," John Kabat-Zinn in 2013, and his intention to make MBSR as accessible to as broad a field of people as possible. However, what guidelines he gives are, from the traditional Buddhist perspective, they are significantly vague. It's my opinion. The statements that, quote, "each person carries the responsibility both personally and professionally to attend to the quality of their inner and outer relationships," unquote, and that one should have, quote, "explicit intentions regarding how we conduct ourselves both inwardly and outwardly," unquote, could comfortably be assigned to the fictional characters of Tony Soprano or Walter White. That's my comment. Of even more concern is the statement that, quote, "because there is a societal tendency to be incongruent with respect to inner and outer moral stances, an implicit teaching of Sila is preferable," unquote. This seems to state that because there's a disparity between the ideals people hold and what they actually do, it's best not to talk about the subject at all. If this is the correct interpretation of the comment, and again from a traditional Buddhist standpoint, this is a very dubious principle on which to structure a pedagogical approach and a system of would-be beneficial psychological practices. So I confess I was having a bit of a rant there, and I was wondering what John Kabat-Zinn would say about that, but he read it and he was quite okay with it, to his credit. But I felt that that sense of things being implicit, it was so vague, and it kind of, and yeah, Walter White from Breaking Bad, who's a meth cook, cooking meth and making millions of dollars for his family. Yeah, he's doing it on purpose. It's deliberate. He has an intention in mind. He is surveying his internal concerns. Yes, thousands of people are going to have their lives messed up by this, but it's worth it because this is what my family needs to survive because I'm dying of cancer. That's his ethic. That's the story of that whole series. And so, yeah, it was deliberate. It was thoughtful. He's paying attention to the standard, and he's a meth cook. So that I'm not accusing other people here of having dubious lifestyles, but I feel that that kind of, or like Tony Soprano of the mafia boss, yeah, it's just deliberate, it's intentional, it's for the family, and a few people get rubbed out along the way, and that's those things are not insignificant, and that I feel that again, this is my biased viewpoint, that if there can be a way that our actions, our speech, can be guided by concerns of what has a beneficial result and a harmful result, then the 5 precepts to refrain from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from lying, and from using intoxicants, those create a very helpful standard of conduct to help stop creating trouble for ourselves and for other people, to live skillfully and kindly. It doesn't have to be a sort of a fiat from above, like thou shalt not, as a kind of diktat from outside, or held in a kind of with the sort of Victorian moralism, but rather like the law requires that you have effective brakes on your car. If you're going to be on the road, if you get pulled over and then the police want to check your brakes and they don't work, then you're off the road. So similarly, I feel it's helpful to think of these ethical guidelines in terms of driving safely amongst the other members of the traffic on the road. Another couple of things before I wind up I'd like to say in terms of challenges and possibilities. Again, kind of going back to what I was saying about sensitive dependence on initial conditions, that small things can have a big effect. So sometimes when we see how things are progressing, it's like the books that are really popular, like the Dalai Lama's The Art of Happiness, or Sogyal Rinpoche's Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, million selling books, or kind of large-scale events, like if His Holiness is teaching and filling up the Oakland Coliseum, or the kind of tens of thousands of people showing up for kind of grand teachings or celebrations. These things can get our attention, and think, oh, that's a sign of major activity, or that things that are kind of large and grand and visible. But I would also suggest that the signs of Buddhist practice, or important Buddhist events, or events that really deeply impact the well-being of the society based on mindfulness and Buddhist teachings, they can be very small, they can be very insignificant. So, for example, for the monastic community at Abhayagiri, I was spending the last 10 days up there, and for a number of the monks, the most significant thing about living at Abhayagiri is they've developed this method of making brown dye from manzanita bark. It's like, wow, this is great, this is really important. And I'm not kind of making a joke of that. It's like, that's really important. I thought, wow, you're dyeing your robes with trees that grow from these California soils. Yay! And so for some people that's more important than giving a teaching to 20,000 people in the Oakland Coliseum. Or just tomorrow, a couple of the monks who are actually gathered here, again, they're going to be dropped off on the way back to Abhayagiri, just let out of the van, and they're going to walk for the rest of the way back to the monastery, relying on alms from strangers. There's no organized food given for them. We don't carry food, we don't carry money. And this is not, many of our community members have done that. They're walking through the countryside, relying on the kindness of strangers with no money. I realize that might be illegal. You might get stopped by the cops and told that you've got to have money on you, or otherwise you're going in the slammer. But we risk it. But those kind of small things, or like 50 years ago, for the Chinese Buddhist community, Master Xuanhua led a seminar on the Shurangama Sutra in 1968. At that time, he was a fairly unknown Buddhist teacher, could hardly speak any English, and a number of very sort of hairy and bearded, long, hippie-clad Buddhist students, in the most part, maybe some of you were there at the time, gathered around him, and he had a session for many weeks during 1968. Other things were happening in the Bay Area in 68, as we know. But he had this seminar on the Shurangama Sutra, and that produced the first Westerners who became his disciples. And his monastic community, which has many, many centers around the world, the largest Buddhist monastery in the West, City of 10,000 Buddhas, sort of grew up from that core period of teachings that kind of lit a fire. And who in San Francisco knew that there's this Chinese monk down in this old mattress factory in the Mission District, carrying out these teachings on a Chinese text to a bunch of dedicated hippies, But yeah, that lit a fire, and then all these years later, there's a big effect that comes from that. So the last little thing I'd like to say in terms of prospects, and I feel that Buddhist teachings and mindfulness, but Buddhist teachings in particular, can bring to society, is a sort of a kind of pet project that I have at the moment, is in terms of the goals of our life. And what we look forward to, not just as adults, but as children, what is put forward before our families as the possibilities for our human life. And I realize people who come and listen to a Dhamma talk on a weekday evening, when you could be doing all sorts of other interesting things, you're probably it's a self-selecting group, so people are likely to have somewhat less worldly goals than others. But for most of our society, what is there to look forward to apart from a comfortable retirement, making a pile of money, becoming famous as a writer or getting a lot of Instagram followers, having 1,500 academic papers published, or getting a Nobel Prize? That's the best we can look forward to. And for most of us who are not looking forward to Nobel Prizes or 1,000 publications, at least having a good retirement home and getting your kids into a good college, that's the most that we look forward to, and hoping that we don't have too much pain before we pop our clogs, as we say in England, fall off our perch, or our life comes to an end. That's what we look forward to, that coping in a comfortable way and hoping that we can leave a little bit of a mark if that's what interests us. That's what we have to look forward to. That's what the children are kind of educated to look forward to. And the most exalted people are the ones who are famous because of being movie stars or Instagram or YouTube stars. and that people literally die in the process of trying to get YouTube followers. You know? That seemed to be, probably none of us here, but I feel that it's one of the most skillful and beneficial things is that we have a tremendous potential as human beings. Our minds can do more than just cope. We can be more than just comfortable. We have the potential to develop the mind to qualities of excellence, qualities of freedom, qualities of joyfulness and peace and fulfillment that the Buddha defined in his teachings of the stream entry, the non-return, the once returner, non-returner, and arahatship. And I feel that to some degree, raising up those qualities of well-being, like maybe in the DSM-6, they have a section on stream entry. Who knows? Yeah, maybe there's any authors or editors for the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That I feel that expanding the nature of our view of well-being beyond just surviving and coping and having a good retirement plan, we can do that, and that's something I feel that is one of the richnesses of Buddhist practice. That is that the message to us as human beings, to our young people, older people, we can do something with our mind. We can work with our mind. Our mind is not just a neutral blank page, but we can work with our mind, and it can be, cultivated. The mind, the heart can be cultivated to degrees of well-being, to degrees of clarity and peacefulness and wisdom that are truly wonderful and delightful, and that we can really enjoy our life, and our life can be a genuine blessing to others. And I feel that the more that we can raise up that possibility, not as a kind of inflated sort of ego trip, but I would say that it's not crazy to think of the idea of stream entry as something that we could talk about in schools. That these qualities of well-being and human excellence, it's not just academic achievement or Instagram followers or writing the great novel or publishing thousands of papers, but we can develop our hearts, our minds to qualities of great maturity, great wisdom, and this is a tremendous blessing can be a tremendous blessing for the world. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening, and I'm happy to open things up for discussion.
So Sanjay, would you like to take questions yourself?
Sure, yes. Oh. What's the usual form here? Do you pass a microphone around or just put a hand up, or what?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Hello. I have trained under Christopher Titmus for a while, and I've built for another tweet with the Dhamma list. I've been reading text for a while, and it turns out I'm confused between Chanda and Tanha. And I thought maybe you could speak a little bit more about it, because sometimes Chanda is used for wholesome states of mind, but Tanha is not. And in text it's fine, but when you practice it, it's very hard to differentiate between two. Like, you would get hit by a desire and you go like, what is it? So, yeah.
That's a very good question. You kind of almost answered the question in asking it.
Oh, okay.
But so for those of you who are not familiar with these terms, they can both be translated as desire. So the word tanha is related to the Sanskrit trishna, which means literally thirst. So maybe the better word, an English word to translate it is craving. So because the English word craving has a sense of agitation and obsession and self-centeredness to it. Chanda is desire. It's also translated as enthusiasm or zeal, interest. It's the mind's yes. It's the mind turning to an object and engaging with a positive and energetic quality to it. That the mind comes to something with a kind of an engagement, a picking up of that quality and an attraction towards it. So Chanda, not only is it sometimes wholesome, the Buddha named it as a necessary condition, it's a sine qua non of any kind of spiritual development. You need to be interested. So what are called the 4 iddhipada, or the 4 bases of success, or the 4 sources of power, iddhipada, so that if any task that you want to undertake, whether it's making breakfast, sitting down to meditate, cooking meth, or pursuing a degree at Stanford University, or teaching a degree course at Stanford University, for all of those, you need these 4 qualities. And the first one is chanda. So you need to be interested. If you want to make your breakfast, you need to be interested in making breakfast. And so the first 3 of these 4 work together. So chanda is interest or enthusiasm. Then the second one is virya. You need to use energy. You need to, if you're interested to have breakfast, but you're not going to get out of bed, there's not going to be any breakfast, right? So there needs to be energy engaged. And then the third one is chitta, which in this instance it means thinking things through, reflecting, contemplating. How am I going to do this? What needs to happen? So that those 3 work together: interest, energy, and contemplation, reflection. So whether you're taking on a degree course, or whether you're making your breakfast, or you're sitting down to meditate, then those 3 work together to say, okay, I want to meditate. Can I find a quiet place? Have I got other things I need to put aside? And how much time have I got? And so forth. So then the 4th one is vimamsa, and that means reviewing, or in a sense, recollection. It's the looking back on the results of what you've done. So the first 3 work together as sort of initiating an action, or a project, or a thing that you're doing. And then the 4th one is, well, did it work? Did I get my degree? Does my essay make sense? I sat down to meditate. What's been happening for the last hour? Where has my mind been? Okay, I was trying to become a meth cook. Did it work? Am I succeeding? And I'm deliberately using a range of wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral, because it's the 4 bases of success. That they're morally neutral. They apply in exactly the same way, whether it's a morally positive, negative, or neutral quality. So chanda, in that respect, is that motivating force, and that it's a necessary condition to bring about do any kind of work. So tanha, craving, when we think of craving, then it's usually craving for food, or craving for a cigarette, or craving sexual attraction, or craving to get some kind of sensory pleasure, getting to the movies, or such like. And so that's the most obvious or clearly delineated kind of craving. But in the Buddha's very first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the turning of the wheel of Dhamma, he outlines 3 different kinds of craving. So karma tanha, sensual desire, that's the sort of the most obvious and clearly delineated one. But then it has 2 partners, which is bhava tanha and vibhava tanha. So bhava means to become, or that sense of inclining towards or wanting to be. So bhava tanha is often translated as the desire to be or becoming, the craving for existence, the craving for defined being, wanting to be something, to be someone. So bhava tanha, so like, I want to get concentrated, I want to be admired, I want to be a successful academic, I want to be liked. So it's those more subtle qualities of craving, so that often in meditation, I want to get concentrated, I want to get insight, I want to develop wisdom. They seem to be very good things to want. But bhava tanha always has that self-view element, that selfing element in it. Ahankara, I-making, and mamankara, mind-making. They're woven into it. And then vibhava tanha is the desire to get rid of. I got this incessant chattering mind, I need to shut it up. I've got to get rid of my laziness, got to get rid of greed and fear and aversion, and that desire for annihilation. So I just need to stop feeling. If I could just get this thing to shut up. If only I didn't care. So that vibhava tanha, again, it can seem like, well, in terms of following meditation advice, they tell you to let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, to get rid of your chattering thoughts. aren't I following the instruction? So it can seem like we're dutifully following the advice of the teacher, but that working with the mind in meditation, it can have been completely hijacked, taken over, kind of bhavatana, vibhavatana, sneak in the back door and kind of take over. Or it's like a computer virus, like a Trojan that sort of sneaks in to your computer and takes over the whole program. So we can be, and this is a very, very common theme, and some of the great anguish of people who've been meditating for many decades, maybe a few of us here, that we've been putting a lot of sincere effort in doing what we think is following the right instruction, but trying to get concentrated, trying to get insight, trying to get rid of our defilements, trying to get enlightened, trying to get insight, trying to become a stream enterer. And the more that it's I need to become, I need to get rid of, the more it just compounds the sense of alienation and discontent and stressing. So, what to do, huh? As my grandfather would say, he was German, my grandfather. So, what to do? So, the quality of right effort that the Buddha speaks of in the say the definition of the Eightfold Path, Samma Vayamo, then if you look at that as an example, so you have that again is in the Buddha was very orderly in his thinking. So you have 4 elements of right effort. So you have the first one is restraining the unwholesome from arising. Second one is if the unwholesome has arisen, to let it go. The third one is to cultivate the wholesome, and then the fourth one is the wholesome has arisen, to sustain it. So restraining, letting go, cultivating, maintaining. Now you think, well, how's that different from bhavatana vibhavatana? That sounds just like the same stuff, like stopping defilements from arising, or if they, getting rid of them if they've arisen, getting concentrated, or developing loving kindness, or keeping hold of my concentrated state. But if you pay attention to how those qualities are phrased, then in that development of right effort, there's no self involved. If any kind of efforting and choosing and working was intrinsically stressful, how could it be part of the Eightfold Path? How could it be something that leads towards peace if it was intrinsically stressful? So there has to be a way that we can make effort and give direction to the mind and have a desire, a goal, and act following that goal, giving the mind direction, that directly leads towards peacefulness, that is in tune with peacefulness. So the trick is to learn how to make effort without there being me around. So that there is the restraining of the unwholesome. It's not me stopping the unwholesome from arising, but there's a recognition of anger or fear or aversion and greed is unskillful. Let there be the effort for it to not arise. If it has arisen, let there be the effort to let it go. So what drives that work, that effort, is mindfulness and wisdom. Again, in a way, this is where mindfulness very definitely comes into it. So that the guidance for action and decision making is that mind's attunement to the time, the place, the situation. And that capacity to act is informed by the recognition of what is wholesome, what's unwholesome. So mindfulness has an intrinsic sensitivity to the wholesome and the unwholesome, I would say. That if it's mindfulness that's attuned, it's in tune with reality, with Dhamma, then it recognizes, this goes towards conflict, this goes towards agitation, this goes towards confusion, let it go. This goes towards peacefulness, this goes towards clarity, okay, keep that one, keep that alive. And so that there's effort, there's work being done, chanda is being applied, there's a direction being given, but it's not based on self-view. It's not based on me trying to get something, but rather it's the mind's attunement to the living situation and guiding things in a way that again will bring benefit for this being and for others. So I hope that.
Thank you.
That's the short version. I did a whole 10-day retreat on this theme a year or two ago. Yes, in the check shirt. Yeah.
I have something to offer that might be difficult to hear and engage, and so I guess I asked for your flexibility in entertaining this thought. So my biggest concern about mindfulness in the West is the way that white supremacy can kind of get tangled up in how we view the teachings and how we understand the practice that we do. And this is something that I think about a lot. And so in hearing you speak, I'm feeling the impact of what I see as possibly being the harm of using words like cluttered or superstitious to refer to other forms of Buddhism that that I don't personally practice,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe other people in this room have practiced or are connected to. And of hearing you say something around the way that there might be this privilege that's conferred upon Buddhists in the future, as if it's a PhD or something that's looked upon in a certain way, and that's not how it is now. And just seeing how that's connected to whiteness and white privilege, and how there's, Buddhism has existed in the United States for over 100 years, and it's not new here. I'm just feeling a lot of concern for how the mindfulness movements and how Buddhism can sometimes, cause harm in this way, and wanting to sort of like bring that up a little bit for discussion or consideration.
Oh, thank you. The clutter word gets used a lot, and so for one who lives in a very clutter-filled environment, and having a lot of respect for all those forms and customs, because I live mostly in the West, but we're still very, very connected to our Asian roots, and so that there's I would agree in many respects there's a kind of superiority that can be say voiced in terms of looking at Asian forms and customs. And there was a very interesting, so ironically, it's a kind of significant and slightly embarrassing incident where many years ago, when Spirit Rock was about to be launched, and they created maybe some of you were involved, they created a little promotional film about this new center that was opening up. And Ajahn Amaro had just led a 10-day retreat at the Angela Center. I was sitting with him. This was in 1990, and Jack Cornfield came along and had it was the president of it was IMW, Insight Meditation West, said asked permission. We're launching this new center. Can we have an opportunity to show this little promotional film to everybody at the end of the retreat? So then we all sit there, and then there's Jack making the commentary, and there's some sort of scenes of the valley where Spirit Rock is, and then Jack's doing his little introduction, and I'm not trying to malign Jack. I mean, we're good friends, but this is how it worked out. And so then the film changed to film of our monastery in Thailand, and the community of monks and nuns chanting and bowing, and the large kind of golden-colored Buddha image, and Jack saying, this is exactly what we're not going to be bringing to California, and so this is the kind of sort of the clutter of Asian Buddhism that we're that people are not interested in. We're going to be leaving behind. This is a paraphrase. It's probably not completely accurate, but it was along those lines. And so Ajahn Amaro and I are sitting there. This is our monastery. This is our front. This is kind of our hearth. And our people, our team, our community. And there's Jack's voice, very sweetly saying, "This is what we're not going to do. This is what we're not about." And so this was at the end of a 10-day retreat, and then the fellow who was the president of IMW at the time, Howard Noodleman. You could feel him dying 1,000 deaths as this was playing. He kind of forgotten what the film said. But it was, Ajahn Amaro took it in good spirit. It's like, well, that was embarrassing, wasn't it? I was like, ha, 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 ha. So he was able to kind of meet it. But it was incredibly condescending. And I'm a bit cautious about using the word the term white supremacist, because But it was certainly elitist in that sense of sort of looking down on these sort of Asian customs and forms, and this is the sort of accretions to the Buddhist tradition that we're leaving behind, and this is going to be a sort of new Western Buddhism that we're going to be cultivating here. So that consciousness of that kind of elitism, and thinking, oh well, that's a problem that other people have. I don't have that. And that I'm not subject to that. That's a danger in our society. I didn't realize that how privileged I was in my life. As a sort of white male educated Brit. You come into the world assuming, of course, you're the top of the tree. This is what life is like. And then you over time, particularly living in Asia, living in a kind of rural society with basically a non-financial economy. That it was when I first lived in Thailand in the 70s, it was a farming economy that was based on subsistence living. That people grew the food that they ate, and they didn't really use money very much, and it was extremely poor. There was no electricity in the village, no running water. It was a very, very, very simple society. And so then living in that world, and then that gave me an extraordinarily sort of clear perspective on the privilege that I'd grown up with. And the way that I saw the world was not the way. It was just what came out of a kind of a English public school educated lifestyle, and that it was extremely different from the people that we were living with, and the environment that our teachers had grown up in. So, I feel that that anything that helps us to see that the world that we are in is not the world; it's our version of the world. What we perceive is our mind's version of the world, and to recognize the limitations of our view, conditioned by our language, our culture, our age, our gender, our education. All of that contributes to what we see and what we call the world. And to the more that we can get a perspective on that and say, well, this is just my mind's version of the world. It's not the world. So how does this other person see it? What's her perspective? Where does the truth lie? Just because I see things in a particular way, does that mean it's true? Does it mean that's the whole story? No way. So that the more that we can, in a sense, recognize that our opinions can only be partial, kind of partial truths or convenient fictions, and that we get a perspective on that, then we're much more able to, say, respect and attune to the perspectives that others have. And I feel that Buddhist meditation can do a lot to inform that, and that to reveal our biases and to help us to have the humility to say, oh, wow, I never saw that. It's extraordinary. So one of the powerful experiences for me was when Abhayagiri Monastery first opened in the late 90s. One of the novices was an African American who'd grown up here in California, and he had been through quite a number of foster homes growing up. So his life and his sort of teenage years couldn't have been more different than mine in many ways. He was a philosophy undergrad at university here in California, and he'd sort of, gone on from that to come into the monastery. And so obviously we had a lot in common, Buddhist monastics, but talking with him and living with him, his experience of growing up as an African American male in California in the sort of late 20th century, it was so powerful to engage with him and to have him walk us through to the extent that he could, what he grew up with, and the world as it appeared to, even as a philosophy student. He said he'd go to a kind of faculty meeting and people would put their bags under their chairs. And they kind of moved close to the door. So this is the philosophy department. I'm not dangerous. But still, that's what the kind of thing he grew up with. And the degree to which one could open up the heart and really empathize with such a different world, I feel that those kind of readiness to be informed and to have our view changed, or to really appreciate to the degree possible other people's perspectives, that's an important part of our maturing. What we have as a potential as human beings, to the degree that we can. Also, I didn't realize how English I was until I came to live here in California. I thought I was pretty liberal, but a liberal Brit is still an uptight Californian. I was just, I felt I was fairly sort of, open and adaptable and liberal, but the degree to, I'm seriously, it was really quite an eye-opener, the degree to which people would just tell you everything about themselves within 5 minutes of meeting. And whereas I was a kind of freewheeling hippie type in England, and was kind of very kind of open and flexible, I found myself thinking, oh dear. my upper lip went stiffer. And I kind of find myself tightening up. Like, what do I do with this? And I thought, I'm a bit more English than I realized I was. So I really appreciate it. I feel, there's that ancient saying, it's difficult to be a prophet in your own country. And I feel it was really a great blessing, a benefit to come out of my safe zone of being in the UK and coming to the place where there was very different mores, different standards of communication, and people were just that much more open, and to challenge that, and to find a way of being at home with that. Okay, maybe one more question. Yeah, one last one.
So there is a lot of importance given to mindfulness, which is analytical way of looking at the world. Is why the concentration, the 8th step, is not given importance as mindfulness. Because in a whole brain, we have analytical part and synthesis in unifying the world also. Why we are looking only the mindfulness given importance than the concentration part?
I think your guess is as good as mine. In some respects, I think at the moment mindfulness is sort of the mot du jour, it's the kind of hot topic of the time, and particularly because of that the effects of, say, the work of people like John Kabat-Zinn and the people who developed mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So that's had a big impact. So that's something that's had a very visible and beneficial effect on many, many people. So it's got people's attention. But I suspect that as time goes on, then and people's interest develops, then there'll be more of a looking into these other aspects of Buddhist teachings and traditions and the forms that are available. In terms of the Buddhism coming to the West through in a sense, not through the immigrant Asian community, but through the interest of Westerners learning from the Asian teachers, so that you have say the earliest Buddhists in this country were the Chinese community involved in the gold mining, and also the sort of indentured labor here in the Bay Area of Chinese laborers were brought in. They created their own temples back in the 19th century. Those are the very first Buddhists in the USA. And so you have the immigrant Asian communities that are sort of carrying on the traditions from their home countries, but the Westerners who developed an interest in Buddhism and were learning from Asian teachers. The main thing was meditation, and particularly the aspects of concentration and insight that come from meditation. So teachers like Goenkaji in India, or Mahasi Sayadaw in Burma, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Buddhadasa in Thailand, then the key to the kind of the linchpin of interest and the cause of people's attention and effort and time being spent on listening to those teachers and practicing their according to their advice was around meditation. And so that has been a very strong presence since the 1970s in the Western world. So it may well be that the meditation sort of becomes as widespread as mindfulness. Who knows? My own little kind of shtick on ethics is that where mindfulness-based stress reduction was sort of launched in the late 70s and became very more popular in the 80s and 90s, and then mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression became popular in the 2000s. Then the compassion element became sort of introduced later on. So compassion is kind of the new hot thing. Mindfulness and compassion, self-compassion or compassion for others. So my hope and my kind of say aspiration is that then mindfulness-based behavior therapy, otherwise living according to the precepts, will become the new hot thing. People will discover if you stop telling lies, you'll feel much better about yourself and you'll be less anxious. Wow, look at that, amazing. If you don't steal things, you won't worry about being caught. Wow. I'm kind of playing it up a bit, but I do hope, and I suspect that there will be along the way, kind of as an extension to compassion, that compassion for yourself and compassion for others, if you don't kill things, if you don't steal things, if you are responsible in your sexual relationships and you're honest and discerning in the way you form relationships, and if you are careful with your speech and you refrain from lying and such like, then you will find yourself far more at ease and able to live a life that is peaceful and beneficial for yourself and others. And then the fifth precept, that has a special place insofar as it helps the first four to stay alive. I'd like to think of the precepts as like ring fencing the reptile brain. And if you're familiar with the Jurassic Park, the trouble really begins when the fence comes down. When the raptors get through the boundary. So drugs and alcohol are what knock down the wall that keeps the reptile brain contained. Aggressive and acquisitive impulses are kind of greedy and deceitful impulses, self-benefiting impulses. The precepts help to create a little ring fence that contains those. And when we drink or use alcohol or use mind-altering drugs, then that can knock a few holes in the fence. And then the reptiles, those reptile urges have much more leeway. Any of you who've ever had a few drinks will probably not argue with that observation. I was a serious drinker before I was a monk, so I have direct knowledge of the free running of the reptiles. So I think we've now gone past 7:30, so I think this is probably a good moment to...
many more questions. I would like to ask you about stream entry, but I fear the answer might take us past midnight. So,
I'm not good at short answers.
So I think we'll just have to invite you back another time, but for this evening, thank you very much, and join me in thanking